You are welcome to the Messiah Revelation Ministry, which is a prophetic end-time ministry dedicated to awakening the Hebrews who are scattered all over the world. This is the time to awaken the Hebrew Israelites. The momentum is now because the Messiah is coming. He's coming to judge the world. And today we are tracing the history of the black man, and we are tracing the history to the first Egypt. And we are talking about the first Egypt because we have two Egypts. Egypt located in the continent of Africa, the location of the first civilization in the world, the major civilization that occurred in the world occurred in the first Egypt. The capital of that nation is called Cairo. That's where we trace the history of the Negro to the first Egypt. We have a second Egypt, and the second Egypt is United States. The capital of the second Egypt is Washington, District of Columbia. And when we are tracing the history of the Hebrew Israelites, we are tracing it to the first Egypt. And the reason why we are doing this video is that the history of the Negro has been distorted, and it is the tradition that when they are talking about the history of the Negro in the second Egypt, they start from the period of slavery and slave trade. And so if you remove slavery and slave trade, the historians don't have any history for the Negroes. But the reality is that the history of the Negroes, the history of the Hebrew Israelites, goes beyond the second Egypt. It goes beyond the time of the transatlantic slave trade. It goes as far back to the first Egypt that is located on the continent of Africa. The history goes to the civilization that emerged in Egypt. It goes to the philosophers who emerged in Egypt, the first Egypt, the philosophers who taught and educated the European philosophers, including the one who came up with theories in mathematics, the greatest mathematicians in the world. They came from the first Egypt. It was definitely a Negro civilization, and as recorded in the works of Sheikh Anta Diop, a scholar, a philosopher, an Egyptologist from Senegal. Why do we trace the history of the Hebrew Israelite to the first Egypt? Because it has prophetic implications, and today this is what we are going to do, tracing the history of the Hebrew Israelite to the first Egypt, and we are going beyond the second Egypt. We are going beyond America. We are circumventing the deception and the distortions going on in Babylon, America. And we are avoiding the policy of not teaching the history of the Negro in schools in America. as the governor of Florida is trying to do, trying to prevent the teaching of the history of the Negro, trying to prevent the inclusion of the history of the black man that goes beyond slavery to the first Egypt. This is what we are doing. And as we are doing it, I'll remind you of a book written by C. Williams. The title is called The Destruction of Black Civilization. And the book was published in 1976. The Destruction of Black History, written by C. Williams. And the book is symbolic of what actually has gone on throughout the history, deliberate and intentional destruction of black history, deliberate and intentional destruction of the black identity, particularly his identity as an Israelite. And today we are doing that, and we are going to the first Egypt. We are going to the continent of Africa, and today we are focusing on a lady. Her name is Asenath. And Asenath was the daughter of Potiphar and a pharaoh of Egypt, and the daughter was given in marriage to Joseph. You know the story of Joseph, who was in Egypt, the child of Jacob who was in Egypt. And Egypt was a black nation, and Joseph was given the daughter of Potiphar, and the daughter's name was Asenath. Asenath was a black African woman who, like other black women and men, intermingled with the seeds of the freed and enslaved Hebrews and in Egypt. And when Joseph married Asenath, they had two famous children, Manasseh and Ephraim. And you know the story of Manasseh and Ephraim. And so you should know that they were the children of Asenath and Joseph. And Asenath was a pure black African woman, the daughter of Potiphar, who was given to Joseph to marry, as recorded in the Bible, Genesis 41, verse 45. And so the history of the Negro is beyond the second Egypt. It goes to the first Egypt and even beyond the first Egypt. And we are focusing on Asenath. We are focusing on a black lady, a black woman, a Negro woman who, by divine orchestration, was given to Joseph to be a wife, and they bore two famous people who are in the Bible and who are people who are blessed, Manasseh and Ephraim. As we look into history, then we know the lies and the hypocrisy, because the Europeans have come out with a false theory that the lost tribes of Jacob, they are United Kingdom and United States. And one of them is the lost tribe of Manasseh, and the other one is the lost tribe of Ephraim. So look at the lies and look at the United Kingdom. How can the descendants of United Kingdom be the descendants of Ephraim? Or how can America the American that we know now be the descendants of Manasseh. But this is what they are doing. They are claiming the identity of the children of Jacob, and they have arrogated to themselves the privilege of being the chosen of God. And so you can say, or they will say, United Kingdom is Manasseh, and United States of America is Ephraim. But now the history is very clear. Ephraim and Manasseh were the children of Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, who was given to Joseph to marry. And Asenath was a black woman. The originators of Egyptian civilization were black people. And it depends upon who you listen to. It depends upon the book that you read. It depends upon the philosopher or the historian who is giving you information. It depends upon the Egyptologist who is giving you the information. But the history is very clear that Asenath was a black woman. And the history is very clear that the Arabs went into Egypt around about 638 AD. And so you know that those people who are in Egypt, the first Egypt, they may look white, but they are not the original people. They are not the original Egyptians. And the history is very clear. You can read it for yourself. And so we know who Manasseh was. We know who Ephraim was. We know their mother, Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar. And you know their father, Joseph, the son of Jacob. So you know who you are. As a Negro, your history is not based upon what happened to you in the second Egypt. You have to look beyond slavery and the slave trade. You have to look beyond the books written by the slave masters. You have to look beyond that, and you have to go to Egypt, the first Egypt, and you have to dig for your history. And you have to know there was a lady called Asenath, a black lady, who gave birth to Ephraim and Manasseh, who are two major tribes of Jacob. And so when the Europeans are falsifying records and they are saying that United Kingdom is Manasseh or United States is Ephraim, you know that they are doing what they have been doing all along. And so at this point, what we can say is that the Israelites, before they went to Egypt and after they went into Egypt, were black-skinned people. And so we are now going beyond the first Egypt. And we are saying that the children of Jacob who moved into Egypt were people of that skin. And here you have to consult the historians. And I will recommend a book to you, Black Biblical Heritage, written by an African American by name John Johnson. And I also recommend another book written by Rudolph Windsor. The title is called From Babylon to Timbuktu. And in that book, you will know, contrary to the false historical narrative that has been given to you, that the people who inhabited Ur of Chaldees, they were black people. And that's where Abraham lived, Ur of Chaldees. And his descendants were the people who went to Egypt. And so before the went into Egypt before the story of Joseph. You know, the identity of the people that we are talking about. You know the identity of Joseph. You know the identity of his brothers and sisters. And the Bible is very clear that when Joseph's brothers went into Egypt, the first Egypt, they could not identify who he was because he was not different from the Egyptians. And the Egyptians were black people, and that is an indication that Joseph was a black man. And so that's the story. And so historically, we know that before they went to Egypt, they had their identity, racial identity. And their identity did not change. It did not change when they left Egypt. And when they left Egypt, they went into Canaan. And you know the historic books. And I would still recommend the book written by Rudolph Windsor, From Babylon to Timbuktu. And you know that the Canaanites were God's king people, and that's where the children of Jacob settled after they left the first Egypt. And so we are looking at the history of the Negro. And we are talking about those who are being awakened, the Hebrew Israelites who are being awakened. And it's very, very important to know that their history goes beyond the second Egypt, which is America. America is Egypt because based upon Exodus 20 verse 2, when the Bible uses the term metaphor, symbol, Egypt, is talking about a land of bondage. In America, has not been a land of milk and honey for the Negro. It has been a land of bondage. It was a land, or it has been a land of slavery. It has been a land of racial profiling. It has been a land of subjugation and oppression. It has been a land where people's nails have been on the neck of the Negro, and so it has been a land of suffocation. It has been a land of suffering. So it's a land of Egypt, and this the land where the Negroes were shipped in fulfillment of prophecy in Deuteronomy chapter 28. And as we trace the history of the Negro to Egypt, you have to rely on the historians to tell you that the people in ancient Egypt were dark-skinned people. And here we rely on the best historians, and we are not focusing on Negro historians. We are using white historians, European historians. We are looking at Strabo, the historian. Strabo, S-T-R-A-B-O. He lived around 633 BC, and he said that during his time, it was customary for people to conclude that the Jews were of Negro ancestry. So we are looking at historians like Strabo, who wrote in 633 BC, before the advent of the Messiah. And he's saying that during his time, we are talking about 600 years before the birth of the Messiah. The historian who is writing that it was a tradition, it was known in the world that the Jews were of a Negro ancestry. And we're using the word the Jews, but here we're talking about the Hebrews. And so the conclusion is that the children of Jacob who went to Egypt, definitely they were black people. And the historian Strabo, Strabo, that is his name. He lived around 633 BC, and he is recording that during his time, it was well known that the children of Jacob were of Negro ancestry, and he used the word Jew, and so Jews were of Negro ancestry. And you know, when the word Jew was used in the Bible, the first time the letter J was invented in the Bible, you know that history. And so we are looking at a historian who is well known, and his name is Strabo, Strabo. You can Google, and you can Google his research confirming that the children of Jacob were known to be people of dark skin color. So the case is closed. We're talking about Egypt, and we are talking about the history of the Negro. And what we are saying is that you cannot write the history of the African American, you cannot write the history of the Negro without looking at the history before slave trade. And you have to go to the first Egypt. And here we are not even talking about the civilization that emerged in Egypt. That was a black civilization. We are going to the recognition of Africa in the Bible. We are going to the table of nations in Genesis chapter 10. And the question we are asking you is that which nations were mentioned or are mentioned in the table of nations? Do you see Ethiopia there? Do you see Egypt there? And the question you ask yourself is that does Ethiopia exist now? Does Egypt exist now? Do you see any European nation mentioned in the table of nations in Genesis 10? Do you see America? Do you see United Kingdom? Do you see Portugal? And so when you are tracing the history of the Negro, first of all, you don't use the second Egypt as the standard. You don't use America as the standard. You don't use the archives in America as the source. You don't use the museums in America. You don't use the movies in America, the second Egypt. And you don't even stop at the first Egypt. You go to the Bible, the Holy Book, the Old Testament. You go to Genesis chapter 10. You go to the table of nations, and you look at the nations that are listed. And when you go there, you will know the centrality of Africa in the Bible. And so you will know that the Bible is the history of the Negro. The Bible is the history of the black man. And so when you are writing the history of the black man, you go beyond the second Egypt. You go beyond the first Egypt. You go to Elohim himself, who is the source of knowledge, who is the source of the Bible. He is the source of both the Old and the New Testament. And you go to Moses, and you go to the table of nations in Genesis chapter 10. So Asenath is very, very important. A lady, a black lady, Egyptian, the daughter of Potiphar, the wife of Joseph, the mother of Manasseh and Ephraim. She's very, very important. It's important because she is your ancestor. I'm talking about the Hebrew Israelite. Asenath is your ancestor. She is the mother of Ephraim and Manasseh, and she was a black woman. And you know, Her children are recorded in the Old Testament. Her children are recorded in the New Testament. The tribe of Ephraim and Manasseh. The Lord will select people from those tribes to be in the 144,000. And if you have read about Joshua, you know what he did. Joshua, the successor to Moses, who led the Israelites into the land, into Canaan, into Jericho. He traced his ancestry. Joshua ben Nun, Joshua the son of Nun. He was from the tribe of Ephraim. He was an Ephraimite. And so Joshua, who led the Israelites into the promised land. Joshua discussed in the Bible. Joshua who talked to Elohim. And Joshua who led Israel, the children of Jacob, into the promised land. And Joshua was a descendant of Ephraim, who is a son of Asenath, who was a black woman. And so that is the conclusion that we are drawing. You trace black history to the first Egypt, which is located in Africa. And when you go to Egypt, you will discover Joseph. And when you see Joseph, you will see Asenath, his wife. And when you see Asenath, you see her children, Ephraim and Manasseh. And then when you trace the history, then you will know that their descendants were people of valor, people of courage. They were military strategists, including Joshua himself and his descendants live in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was destroyed AD 70. His descendants, Ephraim and Manasseh and Judah, their descendants fled Jerusalem. They live in West Africa. The place called the Kingdom of Judah, and they were enslaved to all the four corners of the earth. And now they are hidden in the second Egypt. But if you are tracing their history, you have to go to the first Egypt.